"Open the casket!" The maid's toddler screamed at the billionaire's funeral. The fiancé froze. I wasn't going to tell this story, but after hearing what happened at this funeral, I couldn't stay quiet. A 3-year-old little girl, barely tall enough to reach a doorknob, walked into a billionaire's funeral, looked straight at his closed casket, and screamed 4 words that stopped the entire room cold. The fiancée, a 28-year-old woman who had been standing there crying, accepting everyone's condolences, suddenly went completely pale. Her hands started shaking. And in that moment, every single person in that room realized something was terribly, terribly wrong. What did that tiny little girl know? That nobody else did. Welcome back, beautiful people. I am so glad you are here today because what you are about to hear is one of those stories that will stay with you long after it ends. Before we dive in, I want to ask you something. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your city and country in the comments below. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now listen, today's story is emotional. It is heartwarming. It has a twist that I genuinely did not see coming the first time I heard it. It involves love, secrets, betrayal, and the most unexpected truth-teller you could ever imagine. A 3-year-old little girl who couldn't even spell her own name, but somehow knew everything. Stay with me. This one is going to move you. Some people leave this world quietly, and some leave behind questions that shake everything. His name was Daniel Hargrove, 32 years old, founder and CEO of Hargrove Digital, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the American Midwest. Based out of Chicago, Illinois. By every public measure, Daniel was the kind of man people wrote articles about. Sharp, ambitious, generous with his employees, and genuinely kind in a way that felt rare for someone with that much money. He had grown up in a modest household in Ohio, built everything from scratch by his mid-20s, and carried himself with a kind of quiet confidence that made people trust him almost immediately. He was also, by all appearances, deeply in love. Her name was Vanessa Cole, 28 years old. She was stunning in the way that made people turn their heads in restaurants. Tall, polished, always dressed like she had somewhere important to be. She and Daniel had been together for 2 years, engaged for 7 months. Their relationship was the kind that got photographed at charity galas and mentioned in social columns. Vanessa had been a marketing consultant when they met, and she had a sharp mind and a sharper smile. People who didn't know her well thought she was perfect for Daniel. People who knew her a little better weren't always so sure, but nobody ever said anything out loud because Daniel was happy. Or at least he appeared to be. Then, one cold Tuesday morning in February, Daniel Hargrove was found dead in his Lakeshore Drive penthouse. No signs of forced entry. No violence. The medical examiner called it cardiac arrest. Sudden, fast, devastating. He was 32 years old with no known heart condition. His personal physician was stunned. His business partners were stunned. The entire Chicago social and business community went into shock. The funeral was scheduled for that Saturday. Now, here's where I need to introduce you to someone else. Someone most of the people in Daniel's world barely knew existed. Her name was Rosa Mendez. She was 41 years old and had worked as a private housekeeper for Daniel Hargrove for nearly 5 years. She was quiet, hardworking, always early and always thorough. Daniel had hired her through a staffing agency when he first moved into the penthouse, and over the years she had become one of the few constants in his life. She knew his routines, his habits, which brand of coffee he preferred, when he hadn't slept well because of the way he left his kitchen. She was, in many ways, invisible to the rest of his world, which is how these things usually go. Rosa had a daughter. Her name was Lily. 3 years old, small for her age, with wide brown eyes and curly dark hair that her mother always tried to keep in 2 little pigtails. Lily had no father in the picture. Rosa raised her alone, brought her sometimes to work when the daycare fell through, and Daniel had never once complained. In fact, people who had seen Lily in the penthouse said Daniel seemed to genuinely enjoy having her around. He would bring her little snacks from his kitchen, make funny faces at her from across the room. It was sweet, everyone said. The kind of moment that reminded you even very rich people are human beings. The week before the funeral, Rosa received a call from Daniel's estate manager telling her she was welcome to attend the service. It was a private ceremony. Immediate family, close friends, key business associates. Rosa was touched to be included. She arranged for Lily to stay with a neighbor, but the morning of the funeral, her neighbor had an emergency and called to cancel. Rosa had no one else to call. She debated not going at all. But something, she would later say she could not explain what, made her bring Lily with her. She dressed her daughter in a small navy dress, the nicest thing the little girl owned. She told Lily quietly in the car that they were going somewhere very sad, that a very nice man had gone away, and that Lily needed to be very, very quiet. Lily looked at her mother with those wide, serious eyes and said, "Okay, Mama." They arrived at the funeral home in Lincoln Park just before the service began. The room was already filling up. Elegant people in dark clothes, soft music playing, enormous floral arrangements flanking a polished mahogany casket at the front of the room. The casket was closed. Rosa found a seat near the back, settled Lily on her lap, and tried to hold herself together. She had genuinely cared about Daniel. Losing him felt like losing something that could not quite be named. Vanessa was standing near the front, surrounded by Daniel's family members, accepting hugs and whispered condolences. She was dressed in black, composed, graceful, the picture of a grieving fiancé. And then Lily looked up. Her little face changed in a way Rosa had never quite seen before. Her brow furrowed. Her eyes moved slowly from the casket to Vanessa and then back to the casket. And she tugged on her mother's sleeve with both hands. "Mama," she whispered. "Sure, baby," Rosa said softly. But Lily kept staring. What do you think a 3-year-old could have possibly noticed in that room that all the adults had already missed? Sometimes the truth hides in plain sight, and only the innocent can see it. The service began with soft words from a pastor who had known Daniel's family for years. He spoke about Daniel's generosity, his drive, the way he made people feel seen. Several of Daniel's business partners gave short remembrances. His mother, a small woman from Columbus named Margaret Hargrove, sat in the front row clutching a handkerchief, her shoulders shaking quietly. His younger sister, Pauline, sat beside her holding her hand. Rosa sat in the back row with Lily still perched on her lap, the little girl's eyes still moving around the room with that strange, focused expression. Rosa gently stroked her daughter's back, trying to keep her calm and quiet. Lily was not fidgeting the way she usually did in unfamiliar places. She was still, almost unnaturally still for a 3-year-old. Rosa noticed it but didn't understand it. The ceremony moved toward the period where those who wished to share a memory were invited to speak. Vanessa stood up. She walked to the front of the room with the careful, controlled movement of someone trying very hard to hold themselves together. She spoke about meeting Daniel at an industry event in downtown Chicago. She spoke about how he had made her feel like the most important person in the room. She spoke about the future they had planned together, a home in Winnetka, a life built around shared dreams. She cried at the right moments. Her voice broke at the right moments. She pressed her fingers to her lips in that particular way that telegraphed grief. Most people in the room were moved. Rosa watched Vanessa carefully from the back row and felt something she could not fully name. A low, quiet discomfort sitting in her chest like a stone. You see, Rosa had spent 5 years inside that penthouse. She had watched Daniel and Vanessa's relationship up close in the way that only housekeepers and assistants ever really do. Invisibly, unintentionally, while folding laundry or cleaning the kitchen while they sat at the counter talking. She had seen the warmth in Daniel's eyes when Vanessa first started coming around. She had also seen, over the last several months, something shift. Quiet tension. Separate schedules. Conversations that stopped when she entered a room. She had never said a word to anyone. It was not her place. But she had noticed. About 3 weeks before Daniel died, Rosa had arrived at the penthouse for her regular Tuesday cleaning and found Daniel in his home office looking tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. He had smiled when he saw her. He had asked about Lily. And then, in a moment that Rosa had replayed in her mind 100 times since his death, he had said something strange. He had said, "Rosa, I want you to know, you are one of the most trustworthy people in my life." Rosa had thanked him quietly. She had not known what to do with the weight of those words. Daniel was not a sentimental man. Not in that direct way. She thought about those words every single day after he died. Now, sitting in that funeral room, watching Vanessa perform her grief at the front of the room, Rosa felt those words come back to her again. Heavy. Meaningful in a way she still couldn't fully decode. Lily tugged her sleeve again. "Mama, why is the box closed?" "Shoo, sweetheart. That's how it is sometimes." "But why?" "Because Mr. Daniel is sleeping inside, baby. We don't want to wake him." Lily considered this with that serious 3-year-old logic that is somehow both simple and profound. And then she said very quietly but with absolute certainty, "He doesn't want to be in there." Rosa's heart clenched. "What?" But Lily had already turned her wide eyes back to the casket and gone silent again. After the formal service ended, there was a brief period where guests were invited to approach the casket area, pay their respects at a small photo display nearby, and speak with the family. Rosa stood carefully with Lily on her hip and moved toward the front of the room slowly, waiting her turn. She wanted to say something to Daniel's mother Margaret, who had always been kind to Rosa the few times they had met. As they got closer to the front, closer to the casket, Lily's body changed. Rosa felt it immediately. The little girl went rigid. Her legs tightened around Rosa's hip. Her hands gripped Rosa's collar. "Mama," Lily said louder this time. Not a whisper. "Easy, baby," Rosa murmured. They were maybe 6 feet from the casket now. Rosa could see the flowers on top of it. The polished brass handles. The perfect stillness of the wood. Lily's head turned. Her eyes landed on Vanessa, who was standing nearby accepting condolences from a group of Daniel's colleagues. Vanessa had not yet noticed Rosa or Lily. And then Lily pointed. Her small finger aimed directly at Vanessa Cole. And she said clearly, loudly enough for the 3 nearest people to hear, "That lady made Mr. Daniel cry." The small cluster of people nearby went quiet. Rosa felt her whole body go cold. What would you do if you were Rosa in that moment? Would you pull your child away, or would you let her speak? And then came the moment that changed everything. The 4 words nobody in that room was prepared to hear. Rosa's first instinct was exactly what any mother's would be. She pulled Lily gently close, pressed her lips near her daughter's ear and said, "Shoo, Lily, not now." Her face was flushed. She felt the stares of the people nearby like heat on her skin. But Lily was not done. The little girl wriggled in her mother's arms, not in a tantrum way. Not in the way children act out when they want attention or candy or to go home. This was different. This was focused. Determined. Lily's eyes stayed fixed on the casket with an expression that Rosa could only describe later as something close to urgency. Vanessa had heard the commotion. Her eyes moved across the room and landed on Rosa. For just a fraction of a second, a fraction that Rosa would never forget, something crossed Vanessa's face. Not grief. Not confusion. Something tighter. Something that looked almost like fear. Then Vanessa composed herself and smiled the way people smile when they are trying to manage a situation gracefully. She took a small step in Rosa's direction. And that is when Lily drew in a breath. And screamed it. 4 words. Clear as a bell. Loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Open the casket. Open it." The room froze. The murmuring stopped. The soft background music seemed to fade. Every single head in that room turned. Margaret Hargrove looked up from her seat in the front row. The pastor turned from his conversation near the side wall. Daniel's sister Pauline stood up from her chair. Business partners and friends and family members all turned toward the back of the room where Rosa stood with her daughter, both of them now the absolute center of attention. And Vanessa Cole. Vanessa had gone completely, utterly still. Her face had turned a shade that Rosa could only describe as the color of old paper. Not white exactly. Pale in that particular way that happens when blood genuinely drains from someone's face. Her hand, which had been holding a small clutch purse, went rigid at her side. She did not move toward the casket. She did not say, "Oh, don't worry, it's just a little girl." She did not laugh softly and try to redirect the moment. She just stood there. And that stillness, that single moment of frozen, exposed stillness, told Rosa everything she had not known she already suspected. Margaret Hargrove stood up from the front row. She was a small woman, but she moved through that room with a quiet authority that parted the crowd. She walked directly to Rosa. She looked down at Lily. The little girl looked back at her with those wide brown eyes, completely unafraid. "Baby girl," Margaret said softly, bending slightly toward Lily. "Why do you want to open the casket?" And Lily, 3 years old, navy dress, 2 little pigtails, looked at Daniel's mother and said in a perfectly clear, perfectly earnest voice, "Because Mr. Daniel told me something was in there." The air went out of the room. Rosa's mouth fell open. Her mind started racing backward to every single time she had brought Lily to work, to every morning Lily had sat at Daniel's kitchen counter while Rosa cleaned, to every time she had looked up from folding laundry and seen Daniel handing Lily a cracker or making her laugh with a silly face. Children that age absorb everything. They understand more than adults give them credit for. "He told you," Margaret said carefully. "When, sweetheart?" Lily thought about it with the gravity of a 3-year-old and said, "The last time." The last time. Rosa's breath caught in her throat. The last time Lily had been in that penthouse was exactly 9 days before Daniel died. Rosa had brought her on a Thursday because the daycare had a water pipe issue. Lily had spent the morning sitting in the kitchen. Daniel had been home, working from his office, coming out occasionally for coffee. Rosa had not been in the room the entire time. She had assumed it was nothing, small talk the way adults do with small children. Nonsense words and funny voices. But what if it wasn't? Margaret straightened up. She turned and looked directly at Vanessa Cole with an expression that had moved past grief and into something colder and more deliberate. "I would like the casket opened," Margaret said, quietly, to the funeral director who was hovering nearby looking absolutely horrified. "Mrs. Hargrove, I really don't think," the funeral director began. "It's my son," Margaret said. "I would like it opened." Would you have had the courage to do what Margaret did in that moment? Or would you have stayed silent to keep the peace? What they found inside that casket did not just end a funeral. It unraveled an entire lie. The funeral director stepped forward with visible discomfort, spoke quietly with one of his staff members, and the room remained locked in that suspended, collective silence that happens when everyone present understands that something enormous is unfolding but nobody yet knows the shape of it. Vanessa had still not moved. She stood in exactly the same position she had been standing in when Lily screamed. Someone near her had put a hand on her arm, a friend maybe trying to offer support, and Vanessa had not acknowledged it. Her eyes were fixed on the casket. The lid opened slowly. Daniel Hargrove lay inside in a dark suit, hands folded, exactly as expected. The gasp that went through the room was the involuntary kind. The kind that happens even when you logically know what you are going to see. Death makes people gasp even when they are prepared for it. But Margaret was not looking at her son's face. She was looking at what was tucked beside him. There was an envelope, white, sealed, positioned carefully against the inner lining of the casket near his right hand, as though it had been placed there intentionally, not accidentally, not by the funeral home, by someone who had access to that casket before the service began. Margaret reached in with steady hands and took it. The envelope was addressed in Daniel's handwriting. His actual handwriting, which his mother recognized immediately. It said, "For whoever needs to know the truth." The room had ceased to breathe. Margaret opened it. Inside were two things: a handwritten letter, 3 pages front and back, and a small USB drive. Margaret read the first few lines silently, and then she stopped, and she looked up at Vanessa. And whatever was in those opening lines was enough, because Margaret's expression shifted into something so precise and so devastating that several people near the front row later said it made them feel cold. "Where did you find this?" Margaret asked Vanessa. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. Just slightly. Just at the edges. Her chin lifted the way people's chins lift when they are trying not to cry, or trying not to confess. "I don't know what that is," Vanessa said. "You don't know what this is," Margaret repeated. It was not a question. Here is what was learned in the hours, days, and weeks following that funeral, pieced together from Daniel's letter, the contents of that USB drive, and a private investigation that Margaret Hargrove quietly commissioned the following Monday morning. Daniel Hargrove had not been at peace in the final weeks of his life. He had discovered something that shook him deeply. Evidence that Vanessa Cole had been in contact with a business competitor for months, feeding them strategic information about Hargrove Digital's upcoming product launches and investment plans. She had been doing it carefully, quietly, using a secondary email account and meeting the competitor's representative, a man named Elliot Marsh, at locations far outside her and Daniel's shared social circles. Daniel had found out approximately 3 weeks before his death. He had not gone to the police. Not yet. He had been gathering evidence, processing the betrayal, trying to determine the full scope of what had happened and why. He had written the letter as insurance, a documentation of everything he had found, and he had entrusted it to his estate attorney with instructions to place it in the casket if anything happened to him before he was ready to act. His estate attorney, a man who had known Daniel since his early days building the company, had honored that instruction without question. And Daniel's cardiac arrest at 32 years old with no prior heart condition was now, in the wake of this letter, something that the Cook County Medical Examiner's office would agree to look at again. But here is the part that broke every single heart in that room. In the final page of the letter, after all the evidence, all the documentation, all the careful and precise accounting of what Vanessa had done, Daniel had written something that had nothing to do with business, something personal. Something that had clearly cost him a great deal to write. He wrote that despite everything, he had loved Vanessa the way people love things they know are not entirely safe. With hope, with willfulness, with a particular stubbornness of someone who keeps choosing to believe in people. He wrote that he hoped whoever found this letter would not let grief make them bitter. He wrote that the only person in his life who had never once made him question their loyalty, who had always been exactly who they appeared to be, was a woman who came to clean his apartment twice a week and sometimes brought her little girl on Thursdays. He wrote Rosa's name. Rosa, standing near the middle of that room with Lily still in her arms, heard Daniel's sister Pauline read those words aloud because by then Margaret's voice had given out entirely. Rosa could not speak. She pressed her face into Lily's curly hair and cried in a way she had not allowed herself to cry since the morning she heard Daniel was gone. And Lily, 3 years old, patted her mother's cheek with one small hand and said nothing at all. Because sometimes 3-year-olds understand exactly what needs to happen next. If someone you deeply trusted had written your name as the one person they believed in most, how would that change you? Some stories end with justice. The best ones end with something bigger. The weeks after that funeral moved quickly in some ways and impossibly slowly in others. The Cook County Medical Examiner's office reopened its inquiry into Daniel Hargrove's death. Toxicology reports that had initially been marked as routine were re-examined with greater scrutiny. The investigation was ongoing and moving carefully through proper legal channels. Nothing rushed, nothing sensationalized. Margaret Hargrove had hired one of the most thorough private attorneys in Illinois to make sure everything was handled with precision and dignity. Vanessa Cole retained her own legal counsel within 48 hours of the funeral. She left Chicago. The engagement ring, a custom piece Daniel had designed himself, was returned through her attorney's office in a padded envelope with no note. Elliot Marsh, the man she had been meeting with, was identified. Hargrove Digital's legal team filed a civil lawsuit related to corporate espionage. The case drew attention in Chicago business circles and eventually made several industry publications. None of that, the legal machinery, the professional consequences, the slow turning of accountability, is the part of this story that stays with you. What stays with you is what happened to Rosa. In Daniel's will, which had been updated 6 months before his death, well before he discovered Vanessa's betrayal, he had left Rosa Mendez a substantial portion of his estate. Not a token gesture. Not a small acknowledgement. A genuinely life-changing amount, accompanied by a personal note in the will's documentation that simply said, "For Rosa, who showed up every single week and never asked for anything she hadn't earned. Please use this to make sure Lily has every door open to her." Rosa learned about this from the estate attorney 2 weeks after the funeral. She sat in his office in downtown Chicago in her regular clothes, the same kind of careful, modest clothes she always wore to work, and she listened to him explain the numbers and the terms, and she did not fully process any of it until she was back in the parking garage sitting in her 15-year-old Honda with Lily in the back seat in her car seat. And then she sat there for a long time. She thought about every Tuesday and Thursday she had climbed into that car before sunrise to drive to a penthouse that was not hers. Every morning she had made sure Lily's pigtails were even before dropping her at daycare. Every small kindness Daniel had shown them. The snacks, the smiles, the way he had once asked, completely genuinely, whether Lily had gotten over her cold. She thought about what it meant that a man she had quietly respected her back. She thought about his words, "One of the most trustworthy people in my life," and she understood now that they had not been casual. They had been a goodbye, a recognition, a gift he had been trying to give her before the window closed. She cried until she couldn't anymore. And then she drove home. In the months that followed, Rosa did not change overnight the way people in movies do. She was careful. She was thoughtful. She got real financial advice from a fee-only advisor recommended by a non-profit that serves working-class families in Chicago. She stayed in her apartment for a while because Lily's school was there and her own small community was there, and those things mattered. But eventually she started building. Stable home. A savings account that could carry them through anything. And she enrolled in an online program for business management, something she had quietly dreamed about for years and never let herself pursue because the timing was never right and the money was never there. The timing was right now. Lily, for her part, grew into the kind of child who notices things. Her preschool teachers would remark on it. The way she paid attention to people, the way she asked questions that were larger than her years. Rosa never quite knew how much her daughter had actually understood that Thursday in Daniel's kitchen. She never asked. Some things are allowed to remain gently mysterious. Margaret Hargrove and Rosa met for coffee twice that spring. They did not talk about the legal case or the investigation or any of the enormous machinery still turning in the background. They talked about Daniel, the small things, the real things. The way he stress-cleaned his kitchen when he was anxious. The way he always remembered birthdays. The way he had believed, almost stubbornly, that the people around him deserved his best. Margaret brought a small stuffed bear to the second meeting. She said Daniel had kept it from childhood, and she wanted Lily to have it. Lily named the bear Daniel. She still sleeps with it. Here is what this story taught me, and I hope it teaches you something too. Loyalty is not loud. It does not announce itself at parties or demand recognition at galas. It shows up quietly on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It comes in with pigtails and a little navy dress. It does its work without applause and without expectation. And the people who see that loyalty, who genuinely see it and honor it, those people are rare. But they exist. Daniel Hargrove existed. And in the end, when the noise and the performance and the betrayal fell away, what remained was something clean and simple and true. A man who knew who was real. A little girl who could not explain what she knew but knew it anyway. A mother who had only ever tried to do right by both of them. Sometimes the truth needs a 3-year-old to say it out loud. Because adults have learned too many reasons to stay quiet. Don't stay quiet about the things that matter. If this story moved you, even a little, please give it a like right now. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. And every single like means something. If you are new here, please subscribe. We tell stories like this every single week. Stories that are real, emotional, and worth your time. You do not want to miss what is coming next. And in the comments, I want to hear from you. Which moment hit you the hardest? Was it Lily's scream? The letter? Rose's name written in Daniel's own hand? Tell me below. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story about loyalty being honored, about quiet people being seen, share this with them today. You might not know how much they need it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying until the end. This community is everything.